It's a fairly common trend in esports in general, and in other sports to a degree, but particularly in League of Legends, especially in the West, that people bandwagon newer or new players really hard in the pro scene. Like if a player comes in and he even has 1 or 2 weeks where he has like a big game or a big play, people start going crazy. Like, oh, this guy's like the best at this position, or he's top 3 at this position, or they'll start comparing him to someone who's like an established legendary player, like an icon of the position, who's either playing at the same level or had like one game off that wasn't as good, and being like, oh, he's better than him, that guy's trash, and just getting these really sharp contrasting almost like hyperbole ridden opinions out there, except it's not hyperbole on their part. They really mean this in some sense. They really are just latching onto this small data set and making these crazy strong conclusions from it. Now, first and foremost, generally, I don't really like this as a trend. I don't think intellectually it's a particularly good way to conduct yourself. You're not going to get very interesting conclusions or very reasonable ones from this kind of stuff. There's also the fact that if you think this way, you're just going to be thrown here and there at the whim of single kill, changing one fight, changing the outcome, changing a guy's scoreline. It's not a very sophisticated way to view the game. It doesn't even look into the simplicity of the principles, the fundamentals of what make the game great. More than that, it's not good as a general principle to have like 10 new bandwagons every split, when if you were to go back in history and list all the bandwagons and look at Reddit and see what the majority consensus was saying, this guy's, oh, amazing, that was so great, you'd find, okay, let's say you put I'm picking out 10 as an arbitrary number here. Let's say you picked out the 10 bandwagons for new players each split. At the end of the split, you would find that like of the 10, at least 6 or 7 would have crashed completely and wouldn't be anywhere close to where the peak of the bandwagon was. If not, at the end of that split, at the end of the second split, after they've played, when they've played 2 splits long or a LAN in between, 8 to 9 out of the 10 will have crashed completely compared to the high point there. And many of them, in terms of even being considered top players, some of them might not even be in LCS or might be at the very bottom of LCS. Now, what are the factors behind this, and what are the factors as to why you shouldn't be so quick to bandwagon people? Well, first and foremost, it takes more than one good performance to show that you're good. Likewise, it takes more than some regular season performances when you have games where you can have games off, because then if you have another game that looks good, people forget about that. It takes more than just some regular season performances to prove that you're a good player. You need some playoff performances or some series performances, or you need repeated performances in a row, or you need performances under pressure, such as playoff scenarios. If you're a great domestic player, maybe you need international competition to take the level up even higher and have a higher level of opposition you're playing against, and the context be more important. It takes more than one meta to become a great player, especially to become a legendary player. Having success in one very particular meta on a couple of champions in one very specific kind of team is not the same. It's very rare that someone like that gets into the legendary category. You'd maybe have to be the best player ever within that meta to even get into these realms. In general, it's not going to happen. Also depends what talent you're surrounded by. If you're surrounded by a lot of talent, you might have what looks like a good performance, which in isolation might not actually end up being as good. So I'm thinking of someone like Looper, obviously, who looked amazing when he played on Samsung White. But you look at every other member of the team, they're some of the best players ever at their positions. And you look at him when he went away from playing with Samsung White, and now he's just an average Korean top laner. Not particularly special, not even as good as some of his peers at the time. And some of them have similarly bad kind of skill sets around them, or players who aren't even as great as his Samsung White players and are doing better than him. Likewise, in terms of talent surrounding someone, it can go the other way. So a great example I always think of this is actually Power of Evil, where I actually think Power of Evil is a good player. I think he's bordering on becoming a great EU mid lane. It takes more time and more metas before we get there. But one of the problems is, first of all, he doesn't just like smash it in every game. He's not like Bjergsen. He is reasonably consistent, but the problem is, in a way, he looks so much more impressive because when you look at his team doesn't have any stars. None of the other players in his team reasonably are star players or are top players at their position in the West. It's not the case. They win based on their style, and yes, he's the star player, but by contrast to the people he's playing with, he looks very impressive. That can happen as well. Obviously, it's like the good player on a bad team syndrome. In this sense, they're not actually a bad team in EU, but in like a greater international context or historical context, they are. I imagine a lot of this, I can understand a lot of it, why I try to put myself in people's positions and think, why might they do this, or what information do they have that's causing them to come to these conclusions, or what motivations could they have? So, okay, first and foremost, it is a function of the LCS format, because in games where, like Dota or League of Legends, CSGO, where in general you have a lot of LAN tournaments, And so if people hype the players who do good in the one-off match or win one map or they do well early in the tournament, well, because you every single tournament within that next few days, you're going to see the big finals and you're not going to see them get that deep and they're not going to be doing the great crazy performances in the finals, the best matches in the best of X series. It's much less likely that people bandwagon so hard because they can see that, oh, these players aren't as good or that they're not able to perform as well when they get to these different situations. In LCS, obviously, if you just play only LCS and you don't go to international tournaments, you might only play 2 seasons in a year. So they might look at all the LCS season every time and go, wow, I'm judging it all off this. And then they get to the playoffs, it doesn't go quite how they like. And they're still like, oh, well, that's just a one-off game. Or that was just one bad series. You know, it's not getting drilled into them. This kind of hierarchy that you have to, of principles and priorities that you have to construct and then check the player off against to see where he's rating and how strong a conclusion can I draw from this. Because not only what is a data set, is it large enough, but what is the quality of the data? What is the context of how important is this point, a playoff game versus this regular season game versus like an okay team who didn't make the playoffs anyway? You have to consider all these factors. So, okay, format's one thing, best of ones being one of the key principles there, but even in the past format, because even though there's more games in the past formats, you think we have more data set, yeah, but then there was so many games in the Super Week where we know teams couldn't effectively practice, and you might be playing a super hard team after you played a bad team, or you might play a bad team after you played another bad team, and you get to dominate both and look super good. It was all sort of extenuating circumstances that actually made the data not as good as it could be otherwise. There's also the factor that a lot of the fan base is either young, as in they just don't have much life experience and they haven't experienced a lot of things in life, or they're just inexperienced relative to League of Legends or esports. And if they're inexperienced relative to League of Legends, okay, I understand to a degree why they bandwagon. Maybe they've only seen a couple of splits. Maybe this is even their first split. Maybe they've only seen a few players. Therefore, when they see like KiwiCat have a crazy game one week, or they see Kasing have a couple of games in a row that are crazy, maybe they haven't experienced what some of the great players at the support position in the past were like, or what made up a great player switching from meta to meta and great performances in playoffs and going internationally and doing things. So to them, what they've seen is the best thing they've seen there, or one of the best things. They don't understand the full context that, okay, that's actually, yes, it was good for that moment, but when you take this hierarchy of priorities, like I explained, and kind of the principles behind what makes a truly great player, you see that actually these people are either really far in the case of KiwiCat, or they're still quite far. They've got a lot to do still in the case of someone like a Kasing. This is just the way it is. But I understand though if they haven't come around, because that's something you have to always. I always keep this principle in mind when I'm working on League of Legends stuff. Is the idea that I should always assume the fan base that like a decent amount of them have only watched 6 months of professional League of Legends. Then another decent portion have only watched the last 9 to 12 months, and then the actual portion who've watched more than a year going back at League of Legends is actually reasonably small. I usually think of it in my mind as about 10 to 20% maybe go back more than a year or 2 years back in the history. So you can't just take it for granted that even if they've heard about how great Mad Life was or something like that, if they didn't see it, if they didn't experience any of it, and they don't know how to contrast it against what they see now, then they're not going to be able to make these same value judgments or have accurate analysis of the situation. So I kind of understand in that sense, but that's why I'm setting things straight in this kind of video. There's also, unfortunately, this is a negative quality in humans, sadly, socially, which is there's this desire to be the first to have said something. And so not only were you the first that said this player was good, but you were the first to say he was really good. And then if he eventually one day does become really good, for some weird reason, you think, or the person doing this, thinks that they are extra, they're special. They have some special eye for talent because they not only said this guy was good, but they said he was amazing at the beginning. And even though no one else could have known, that's why they're going to look so amazing. And yet later on, he did become that super amazing. Now, first of all, what's the odds that this is some genius, psychic, godlike analyst who, when no one else has even seen more than 2 games, can know that this guy will be the next, like, Mad Life or be the next Prey or the next Diamond Prox? What are the odds of that? Very unlikely, right? So really these people, to try and get that kind of like sense of feeling of superiority, they're kind of gambling their intellectual honesty to a degree. It's also just a bit tacky to do that in general, okay? Especially as it reminds me of whenever I like to watch documentaries about great sports stars, okay? And so one of the things they'll tend to do is to get some background on a player. They'll go back to like his high school coach or like when he was just a young kid playing like junior hockey or something. And the problem is, I'm sure a lot of these coaches, yes, they have a lot of life experience coaching. They probably have seen tons and tons of kids. And so when they tell you that this player like Mario Lemieux or Messi or someone, or Roger Federer, when they tell you like, oh, I watched him play as a young kid and I knew like this guy's going to be special. The problem is I can believe that in the context of their careers, that's probably accurate. This person probably was better than a lot of the people they coached. But a lot of them have the tendency to participate in this behavior I just described, where they'll say stuff like, oh, I knew he'd be the best player ever. I could see exactly at that age, exactly what he would become later. I mean, that's such a ridiculous notion because the player hasn't even developed. You never know what the motivations. That also implies that, like, well, you know what the motivations of that player will be and how hard he'll work and what opportunities he'll have and how he'll develop and what will happen to him in his career and things. I mean, it's a ridiculous notion, but they want to do it because they want to provide some validity to themselves and get some credit themselves. One of the biggest problems I have with people bandwagoning new players is one of the reasons why I always stand against it, and I might seem rather forthright in putting players down to a level where other people are trying to elevate them really high. It's not that I like hate fun and I don't want these players to be good. And yes, like I say, some of the bandwagons will get through and one day prove to be good. Maybe Kissing one day will be considered the best European support. Obviously, someone like Febvern's a great example. He's very good right now and actually has made it totally through, even though actually he didn't, ironically, didn't have much of a bandwagon and came near LCS. But okay. Sometimes there will be cases, but I wait until they've fulfilled this criteria before I grant them that legendary status or near legendary status or very good elite level player status. Part of the reason I do it, as I've kind of outlined or alluded to here, is that the other great players had to go through this process and accomplish certain things and have sustained excellence, excellent performance, show their skill set, move from meta to meta, adapting, play with different teammates, play a key role in a team, have playoff success, have international success, all these factors to become the legends that they are. We didn't just grant them this legendary status off the day one, after they hit one awesome shockwave, after they beat up this team, had 2 good weeks in LCS, after they had half a good tournament, after they won 1 playoff series. We didn't grant them a legendary status. They're legends because of all the breadth and the depth of what they've able to be accomplished. The horizontal and the vertical of their incredible careers that have spanned years at times, different teams, different tournaments, different eras, different metas. So in a sense, when you take a player who's done very little and accomplished and checked off nearly none of those checkboxes compared to this legend, and you just instantly put him to that guy's level without having to accomplish all that, you not only diminish to a degree in contrast what that great player's done, you kind of steal some of his credit away. He earned that position by what he accomplished and did. This guy hasn't. Yes, he's done good for now, but until he gets there, what's the reason to artificially put him there? Now, it goes back in the things I said before. It tends to be that the person making the judgment has some kind of ulterior motive or something a little bit sinister or just a little bit tacky about the way that they want to be perceived themselves or how they want people to think of them in terms of their ability to analyse. Because think of some of these names I'm going to bring up now and realise that at different points in time, some of these names I'm going to mention now, in fact nearly all of them, at different points in time were legitimately considered either top 2 or top 3 players in their region at their position, or some of them, crazy examples, some of them were even considered by some people, even at very rare times, like for a week or two, Reddit consensus, like as the best. And people were really making cases for them over legendary players at all these positions. So as I read out the list, don't just laugh and go, oh, well, obviously none of those players are, because most of them seem terrible right now, or just not that good or average LCS players. But this list, some of these names really were considered at that level. So okay, let's start with this Overpower, mid laner of Rockhat when they first came into the league. You can find these votes on Reddit. He was winning votes for when people early before All-Stars were saying, who should we send from EU to represent mid lane when they thought it might be the old format of All-Stars. People were really putting Overpower there. I don't know anyone who thinks even anything close to that now. Herkbot, when he was in SK, looked on this bad team like a really good player, really good jungler who went all around the map, provided proper pressure, got his carry players ahead. Seemed to be one of the bright spots of the team. That's why Nukeduck, etc. and Zora wanted him in that NIP team. Obviously, now, no one even would bring his name up in terms of great EU junglers. Kerp, mid laner of Millennium. This is a player where, yes, he would have the flashy games in the regular season, but what did he really do in the playoffs? What did he even do in promotion type matches? Yeah, he'd have the odd game where he had a high variability. He was like a poor man's Xiao Wei Xiao. He'd have this crazy game, but he wasn't the consistent player. He wasn't that great outside of certain metas. He didn't have the longevity. He didn't really accomplish much. He played with some very good players. Yeah, there's not a whole lot of criteria that anyone now would be like, well, Kerp was one of the greatest mid laners of all time. No, definitely not. And yet he was being considered like, he's better than... People were saying he's better than Froggen at certain points in time. Like, him and Bjergsen are the future. How about Shifter? Shifter looked phenomenal for like one split. That first the spring split of 2014, he looked incredible. He was on a bad team, but he looked absolutely amazing. Like, wow, if you put this on a guy on a top team, sky's the limit. He could be like the next great NA player and lead a new dawn of whatever team say he was on a CLG. Like, maybe that's how they rode back to the top. Nowadays, yeah, he's having some good kind of revitalized aspect to his career in Dignitas, but actually it's not even really him that's like the superstar of Dignitas. He's not really like a carry player even now. He's just a good player who it turns out his style limited him and his mentality maybe limited him as well. And maybe the potential wasn't there. Maybe we were just seeing something in a certain meta that we thought was great that didn't apply over history in the same way that Alexic and Expecka are the legends who endured. How about Xmithy? Now, Xmithy legitimately was very, very good for a split. But after that, yeah, he fell off pretty hard, and now he's like okay to a bit above average and plays for one of the better teams now. So again, even now, it doesn't seem that great. To give you a Korean example, I already gave you Lupa, which is like an extreme example because he was at the top and he was a world champion. But another great Korean example, okay, would be Hachani. When I think of Hachani now, I think of, yes, he had that one split where they miraculously won the finals after after 3 best-of-5 series that went to the full 5th game. They won the finals, and he was a player who could make really weird plays and make like thresh hooks, etc. Could make crazy plays, but he also could completely give the game away. He could completely blow it for his team. And yet at one point in time when they were at their peak KTA, people said, hey, he's like a top 2, top 3 support in Korea. He's really good. Now he went off to China. No one ever heard from him again. And he's not even thought of as one of the great players. I bet most people wouldn't even remember him if you asked them to start listing off the great Korean supports. Now, the reason why I make a stress this is, okay, on some of these cases, like on the Shifter one, I maybe myself did slightly get on that bandwagon a bit. I thought like, oh, maybe we should try this out. But I never went super hard. Like I never see he's like the best. But you'll notice in general, my favourite players, so think of people like Froggen, Flame, Diamond Prox, Alexich, who else should we put in there? Soaz. These are players where they do meet all this criteria. They have the longevity, they have a champion pool, they survive metas, they play with different teammates, they've been star roles in their teams, they haven't just been carried on good teams, they've had a domestic success, they've had international success, they've had regular season success, they've had playoff success. This is why these are my favourite players that I put up there, the top echelons or within their regions and positions as like the great players, and why I don't just give up on them also if they have one bad game or one bad run of games. It's not that I'm super bandwagoning, they've earned this respect, they've fulfilled the criteria. The principles of the game, they've managed to manifest them properly and play the optimal way, to a degree, in their positions, and therefore that's why they're my favourite players. Okay, anyway, if you want to play Fantasy League of Legends, or CSGO, but it's a League of Legends video, then you might want to play on alphadraft.com, and I'll put a link in the description below. You can sign up there and I'll get some like referral bonus or whatever, but it's actually different to other fantasy sites I've seen, because the way this works is there's different play days, and you put together your team based on like a total salary. I think it's usually like $50,000 or something, and each player's listed at a salary. So like Reckless would be super high because he's statistically very good right now. Whereas in the past, when they were doing really badly, someone like Forgiven was actually the lowest AD carry on 1 week from Gambit when they were losing every game. You put together your team, who you think is going to get the most points, and then in these contests, let's say it says like first prize is $20 for, I don't know, maybe like a $1 entry one. Then obviously if you have the most points after that play day, you win the $20. So it's fairly easy to understand, but there's a lot of different subtleties and nuance to how you do it, and I think it's quite fun actually. I've done it a bunch myself. Me and Monty have been doing it the last few weeks. So if you want to play Fantasy, League of Legends, LCS, LCK, LPL, NALCS, then go to alphadraft.com.